The priest had brought with them 2 trunks. One contained church vestments and ornaments of great beauty, presents from Cardinal Fesch. The other, newspapers and books that would have been of little interest had the emperor's correspondence published by Penkuke not been among them. When he opened the first of the trunks, the emperor said, "This is the domain of St. Peter. Send it to Buonavita. As for the second, it belongs to me." The 8 volumes of his correspondence in particular caught his attention and were gradually covered by notes written in his hand. The other books interested him very little, for he said to me, "The cardinal could have spared a few thousand francs and sent me some good works." However, after pulling them out one by one, I reached the bottom and found a handsome portfolio of green leather, holding the portrait of the King of Rome and that of Prince Eugene's son, sent by the prince. The emperor smiled with great pleasure at the sight of this miniature of his son. His eyes moistened. "Poor child," he said, "what a destiny." Then, handing it to me, "Here," he said, "place it open on my desk so that I may see it every day." I had taken from the Élysée a portrait of the King of Rome as a child, painted by Isabey, and on that same day the emperor gave it to me. Since the arrival of the priests, Mass was said in the drawing room. The emperor decided that the dining room, which he no longer used, would be converted into a chapel. His drawing room would serve as a dining room. Up until then, a table served to hold the divine office, and nothing enhanced its appearance. We all went to work, and the transformation was complete. Novaraz, aided by a Chinese carpenter, built an altar with 2 steps that were easily removable after the service. Monsieur Pierron, who was quite a handyman, built a very fine gold and white tabernacle in which to place the ciborium and the Blessed Sacrament. Red satin was purchased to stretch across the back wall and 6 feet around. On the side, a drapery held back by 2 gilt curtain hooks kept this material away from the ceiling. Green velvet covered the altar steps and extended like a carpet under the feet of the emperor's prayer bench. A crowned end, 1 foot tall, decorated the middle, and other smaller ones were located at each corner of the same carpet. We had no braiding to add crowns, which we wanted. If the imperial dignity was forgotten by the British government every day, it was not by us. For all the emperor's prestige existed as if he were still on his throne. I mentioned this to Count de Montholon, who remembered the remnants of a uniform he had worn as an aide to the Prince of Neufchâtel. On it we found not only the braiding we were lacking for our crowns, but the means of adding a large cross to the base of the altar, which was covered by cloth decorated with a broad edging of antique lace. 2 silver candelabra with 6 branches were placed on either side of the tabernacle, itself crowned by a black cross with very fine silver Christ. 2 china vases, decorated with flowers on Sundays, were set on a platform overlooking the altar and in line with the candelabra. All this work was completed between Monday and Saturday without the help of outsiders. Strong arms and willingness were lacking in no one. When it was a matter of serving the emperor and showing him our zeal and devotion, the following Sunday we were able to enjoy the emperor's surprise, for his majesty had no knowledge of the preparations made to properly decorate the room he had just assigned as a chapel. Everything was prepared for the hour of noon. The only door allowing light into this room was closed, and it was lit by the candles in the candelabra and 2 lamps with frosted globes set on tables on either side of the altar. Father Buonavita, who was saying Mass, had arrived wearing his finest vestments. Father Vignali assisted him, and Count Bertrand's oldest son was to serve Mass. Count and Countess Bertrand, along with their other children and servants, had arrived. I went to inform the emperor, who was in his apartments with Count de Montholon, that the priest was at the altar. A few moments later, the door leading from his bedroom to the chapel opened, and the emperor came and took his place between the armchair and the prayer bench, set for him ahead of everyone. The Grand Marshal, Countess Bertrand, her children, and General de Montholon were behind him, and behind them the household servants. As daylight did not enter through any opening, it gave a mysterious air to the religious ceremony. After having greeted the emperor, the priest started Mass, which was heard reverently. When it was over, the emperor went into the drawing room and then the garden, followed by the people in his retinue. A half hour later, everything had been removed from the dining room and was put back in place only the following Sunday. As long as the emperor's health allowed it, things continued this way. but when his health declined, he only listened to Mass from his bed. With the door between his bedroom and the chapel open, he authorized the Grand Marshal to have Father Vignali say Mass at his home. And if the emperor did not object, to invite the Irish officers and soldiers of the camp who were deprived of Catholic services to come and attend Mass there. However, this never occurred. The emperor had added to the already beautiful chapel ornaments, an alb decorated with lace, and altar cloths decorated the same way. Father Bonavita had albs made of coarse cloth and wished to have finer ones. He talked to me about it and asked if I couldn't tell the emperor that they had been damaged by rats during the voyage. If you want to have such a lie on your conscience, I said to him, laughing, I shall do it. No, he said, but the sin would not be a very large one. That same evening, I mentioned it to the emperor, who laughed heartily over the good father's trick and told me to have some made for him out of fine linen. When he came in, the emperor expressed to me his satisfaction at the surprise we had prepared for him. Count de Montluçon told me he had been moved when he was told that everything had been done without the help of outsiders. The emperor had a religious soul. His profession of faith made as he was dying. I die in the Roman Catholic and Apostolic Church, in which I was born more than 50 years ago, bears witness to his feelings on this matter. I cannot say, however, that these feelings were more pronounced in St. Helena than in Paris or on the island of Elba. When he entered the chapel, he would go to his place, cross himself, kneel on his prayer bench. At the moment of elevation, he would bow without affectation. The emperor's religious sentiments went back to his childhood and were the result of his early education. They were deep in his heart, and later his genius made use of them as means of government. He said he believed that those people who liked mystery should look for it in those sound morals of religion rather than in Lenormand or Castellstrosso. But his religious habits did not go beyond Mass. He neglected to practice any others and only refrained from eating meat on Good Friday. The proof of this sentiment, which he kept even at the peak of his glory, is in the words the emperor spoke to Countess de Montesquieu when he entrusted his son to her. Madame, I entrust you with the destinies of France. Make my son a good Frenchman and a good Christian. One cannot be one without the other. A few courtiers present smiled at this instruction. He said to them, yes, gentlemen, religion is to me the basis of morality and good manners. The ease with which the chapel had been created gave the emperor the idea of changing the wall coverings in his 2 bedrooms. The nankeen material being dirty and rotted by the humidity, Count de Montluçon suggested using white muslin, and having several spares made allowed him to always have clean material. The emperor preferred silk, but I mentioned to him the difficulty we had experienced in getting the small quantity needed for the back of the chapel, and that it would be impossible to find the necessary number of rolls to cover the walls of his room. On the contrary, striped or plain muslin from India could easily be purchased. The emperor was in a good mood and said to me, well, I can see you don't want silk. Give me the height and dimensions of the room so that I may calculate the expense. I gave him the measurements. He made approximate calculations and gave me a free hand to arrange his bedrooms one after the other. The emperor was firmly opposed to having Englishmen come into his home to clean the furniture and the walls, so I told him that among ourselves, helped by a Chinese, we needed no one. With a pocket knife, the emperor had made a large opening in the wall covering to take a look at the walls, which were quite dirty and in poor condition. The next day, everyone demonstrated his zeal. The nankeen covering stretched on the frame was removed, and white paper was pasted on the walls of the bedroom. A Chinese man whitewashed the ceiling, while others cleaned and waxed the furniture that had been taken outside. Once the measurements were taken, a quantity of striped muslin was purchased. Novaraz's wife, helped by a woman from the camp, cut and attached the lengths of material to one another. Next, she made a hem in the top and bottom of each piece, and as these sections together were much wider than the wall, they could be stretched on ropes to achieve a ribbed look, much more graceful than if they had simply been stretched flat. A small gathered drapery 8 inches high, made of the same material, helped to hide the upper seam, while the one at the bottom rested on the baseboard. Count de Montluçon had a rug brought from town to replace the one that had not been changed for the past 4 years. I had some green silk brought into town to make new curtains for the emperor's 2 little field beds, and in place of the brass on the bedposts on the crown, we substituted the silver eagles from the broken silverware. They fitted perfectly and produced a very fine effect. The portraits of the Empress and the King of Rome were put back in place 8 days had been sufficient to achieve the metamorphosis we had projected. The Grand Marshal wanted to contribute to it by sending a small gilt brass clock and a small bust of the King of Rome as a child, and these objects were placed on the mantelpiece. Our plans would have been disrupted had everything not been put back in place in the same day. It was necessary that the emperor be able to take possession of the room that evening and sleep there. Count de Montsalon understood the wish I expressed and saw to it that the emperor remained in the drawing room a few hours beyond his usual time. As busily as we worked during the day, we finished only at 7 p.m. The emperor was kind enough to come back into his room only at that time. 2 wafers of Houbiget were burning in the incense burner. As for a long time he had been content with sugar or vinegar as perfume. His sense of smell was pleasantly surprised when he entered, and he thought it was aloe wood. I told him it was 2 wafers from 6 boxes that had arrived in town. Pierron had brought them back, knowing that I had been asking for these whenever a new ship arrived from Europe. The room so freshly decorated, smelling so good, so well lit by the covered light, made the emperor smile and say, "It is no longer a bedroom. It is the boudoir of a young mistress." He had not yet noticed his bed when he saw the eagles replacing the brass balls. He turned to me and took my ear, smiling, with that smile that expressed so well his soul's feelings. "This," he said, "is the crowning touch. The idea is all the better, as it works so well. What do you think of it, Montsalon?" The freshness of this room was in such contrast with the one preceding it that the emperor said to me, "It is absolutely necessary that my other room be arranged like this one." A few days later, a similar transformation took place in the other room, still without the help of outsiders, which increased its worth in the emperor's eyes. All these various projects begun in October 1819 were finished in December of the same year. In St. Helena, the emperor had 2 small camp beds. At night, he would go from one to the other, passing from one bedroom to the next. He had told me several times that if he fell ill, these beds would be too narrow. Count de Montsalon had one in gilt brass that he had purchased in town, and he offered it to me to put in the second bedroom. It was taking a great risk to do it without the approval of the emperor, who did not like changes. It even meant the risk of losing the precious reward that we had hoped for from him, a sign of his satisfaction. Green curtains were purchased for his bed. In the emperor's linen supply, I had various laces, including one from Alençon. I had the quilt trimmed with it, as well as the pillowcases. This bed was, in fact, to be nothing but a show bed. That room had no mirror, and I had one requested in town, but there were none. Mr. Darling, who was in charge of the furniture for the new house, learned about this and immediately sent me one 4 feet high by 3.5 feet wide. That was intended for the new house. We placed it on top of the dresser, for in that bedroom there was no mantelpiece. 2 small bookcases were also sent to me and served to furnish that room. When it was completed, the emperor came in and appeared as satisfied as he had previously been. However, as he was getting into bed, he said to me, "I do not want Montsalon to be deprived of his bed. We will have to give it back to him." It was replaced by the second camp bed, as the emperor had tried it out and found he was very uncomfortable in it. "All this lace," he said to me the next morning, "is only good for the marshal's wife." As the 2 bedrooms were approximately the same size, I had a 3rd set of wall coverings made, which allowed a change every 2 months in one of the 2 rooms, which was easily accomplished in 2 hours. The emperor wanted to know how much it was going to cost for what he called so many fine things. The labor, I said to him, was provided by Novarez's wife, who refused to set a price on her work. "I do not want that, but as she does not do anything, put her in charge of the household linen with 1,200 francs a year and pay her for the first month." When, at the end of December 1819, I presented the emperor with the accounting for the month, which included the expenses for the chapel, 2 bedrooms, and the gardens, which all came together to 1,200 francs, he said to me, laughing, "Well, Master Treasurer, how much are you making on this amount? Because something always remains stuck to the hands of a financier." He then went on to talk about the dishonesty of cashiers. He cited a well-known name, a man who had his trust and took care of his cash supply. "He lost both for some nonsense," the emperor said, 30 or 40,000 francs. He wanted to insist I had given it to him, but I have an excellent memory. I said to him, "I will give away 1,000,000, but I do not want 1 penny stolen from me. Bring me back your accounts." And he added, "I have always forced thieves to return what they stole, every time I caught them." The emperor demanded that receipts be given in support of all expenses shown on the books, but he never looked at them. I received 12,000 francs a month, drawn on Count Bertrand's funds in England, which he had made available to the emperor. It was Mr. Hedson, the government commissioner, who had the job of giving them to me on my receipt. The funds were distributed in the following manner. The Grand Marshal, 2,000 per month, 24,000 per year. General de Monthlon, 2,000 per month, 24,000 per year. After his family departed, Monthlon received only 1,500 francs. Supplementary household expenses, 3,500. 42,000 for the year. Wages for household employees, 1,500, 18,000 for the year. This sum represented only in advance against wages. For the emperor's dress, 1,000, 12,000 for the year. Priests and doctor, nothing. Father Bonavita, 250. Father Vignali, 250. Dr. Antomarchi, 250. These sums were only advances against their salaries. The 500 francs for the priests were taken from Count de Monthlon's account after the departure of the countess, so that he only received 1,500 francs per month. The 250 francs for the doctor were taken from funds intended for the supplementary expenses of the household. When I had a considerable sum of money in my cash box, I would change it into gold, either Spanish pieces of 4 or Indian rupees. I would inform the emperor of this and place them in what was called the reserve cash box, to which I had a key. That cash box, kept under the emperor's desk, contained 300,000 francs when he passed away, and mine had 25,590 francs. The emperor said one day that after the loss of his fleet at Alexandria, he had to find a way to conciliate the sheiks and impress the fanatical population. I was informed of the embezzlement committed by the treasurers of the great mosque of Djemil El Azar. I went there one day, he said, and I was accompanied by the sheiks. I showed my astonishment that the Prophet's temple was so poorly maintained. I called for the treasurers and asked them to bring in their books. On examination, it was easy to see the infractions that had been pointed out to me, without their being able to say anything in their defense. I chased away the biggest culprits, calling them unworthy of working there, and urged those who remained to have the mosque better maintained in the future. The sheiks, before whom this scene took place, fell on their knees and expressed their admiration, crying out, "Shallah, Shallah." I did the same for the Coptic Christians, in whose hands part of the financial administration was already placed. Since the arrival of the French in Egypt, they permitted some thefts. Believing they were sufficiently protected by the presence of our weapons, I knew there were many complaints against them, and I had irrefutable proof of their embezzling. I had several of them thrown in prison and chased away others, keeping only the small number among them whose accounts showed they were honest. The severity in my administration made a good impression. It calmed the fanatics and earned me the trust of the sheiks, even Sheikh Sada, whose feelings were not at all favorable towards us. The emperor related that one day when he was leaving for Egypt, Empress Josephine asked him to take along a dwarf who had been in her service and whom she said he could trust. I soon did so, and he appeared worthy of her words until I left Egypt to go to Syria. I left him in Cairo with all of my belongings. But a short time after that, rumors spread that we all had been defeated and killed. That rascal, certain that I would not come back, got the idea of selling my wine cellar full of excellent wines. He was quite disappointed when he saw me again, and even more so when in his presence. My butler told me I had only a few bottles of wine left. I asked him what he had done with it, and he admitted that, believing me dead, he had sold it to make some money. I was so angry that I wanted to hang him, but I only threw him out. "Sire," said the Grand Marshal, who had witnessed all of this, I remember that very well, and we drank some fine wine from the commanding general's cellar at the house of a high-ranking officer who was not boasting about how he had procured it. In December, the gardens and the planting were completed. In order to have shade near the house, we did not hesitate, even at the risk of seeing them die, to move some old trees with mounds of earth requiring the strength of 20 men. We had already attempted this successfully with the lemon trees that provided such good shelter for the emperor in the small garden. We tried this with oaks, which in this latitude, or at least at Longwood, did not grow very well, but spread their branches out like apple trees in France. We transplanted several that did well, and one was called the Emperor's Oak Tree. It was placed along a path near the house. If he did not have lunch inside, the emperor asked to be served under his oak tree, which with the natural arrangement of its branches, created shade above him. Peach trees were also transplanted, and they grew very well. 20 years later, when I was called on to go retrieve the emperor's ashes in St. Helena, I found no trace of the gardens. Everything had disappeared. Only the oak tree was standing, but had not grown. The great stone basin was still there, in a state of ruin, along with a piece of the grass burned. One day, the emperor wanted to have the noisy company of Countess Bertrand's children at lunch. Saint-Denis told me the luncheon had gone very well, but that toward the end they started throwing bread balls at each other. The emperor had taken the youngest on his knees and was kissing and teasing him as he was pulling at his ears. This scene that took place under the orange trees reminded me of the way the emperor acted with his son when Madame de Montesquieu brought him to his luncheon. The emperor would take him on his knees and have him taste his reddened water, although he was still being breastfed, or he would place to his lips a little gravy or sauce that he found at hand. Countess de Montesquieu complained about this mixture. The emperor would burst out laughing, and the royal child shared in his father's laughter. The empress, who was present at these scenes, was also amused, but would not have known how to initiate them, either out of shyness or out of fear of hurting her son. One did not find the spontaneous signs of affection that mothers have for their children in her. She was even ill at ease carrying him, and that gave birth to the rumor that she did not like her son. My mother always told me the opposite. She had much affection for the King of Rome. It is true that she seldom took him in her arms, but if she did not show all her affection for him, it was because he was always accompanied by Madame de Montesquieu. She had been made to feel uncomfortable around this lady to whom she did not always do justice, while the emperor knew how to demonstrate his trust in her. The qualities of generosity and sensitivity do honor to the heart and soul of this princess, who could not be faulted for anything during her stay in France. My mother has always told me that her first reaction was always excellent, but bad influence spoiled everything. It is deplorable that later on, as Marie Therese's granddaughter, she did not know how to remain Hector's widow. For a long time, Longwood had no other water than that brought in barrels pulled on a cart by the Chinese servants. Great works had been undertaken by the governor to build an enormous reservoir at Diana's Peak. When this work was completed, conduits brought water not only to Longwood, but also to the camp. For some time, a trickle of water had been flowing through the conduits to the reservoir raised several feet above the ground, from which we could distribute water to all the areas in the garden where irrigation was difficult. The emperor conceived the idea of setting up basins and bringing water there by conduit. The gardens were on a slight incline, and it was easy to channel the overflow from one basin to another. The emperor indicated the shape he wanted to give to the first one, placed at the highest elevation, its width, its depth, as well as the dimensions of the two others to be placed beneath it. The first one was 14 feet in diameter by 2.5 feet deep. The second was an enormous vat, 12 feet in diameter and 4 feet deep. And third, another vat, 6 feet in diameter by 4 feet deep. These two vats alone cost 1,800 francs. The one made of masonry, semicircular in shape and lined with lead, cost 1,000 francs. A very large aviary, built in Chinese style, was placed at the side of that basin, which was connected to the one in the middle by a canal dug in the lawn. The bottom was a piece of wood 1 foot wide, sunk 2 inches deep, in which the overflow would pass from the first basin to the second. This second basin was likewise connected to the third by a similar canal, and when needed the latter, conduct the water through the wooden gutters to the vegetable garden located in a lower place. All the earth from these basins had been placed in a circular mass at the end of the garden at the height of the veranda. It was given a cylindrical shape and arranged in terraces to form an amphitheater. Each tier was planted with grass to hold back the earth, and flowers and rose bushes could be planted there. The whole thing had a fine appearance, but this mass of earth interrupted the view of the vegetable garden. One morning, the emperor had us take our pickaxes and shovels, had some beams and boards brought, and said he wanted to cut a hole through that mass of earth in order to make a small grotto there. He first had us dig between the second and third basins a trench 4 feet deep, 8 feet long, and 4 feet wide. It thus reached the level of the vegetable garden, which he could now enter by going through the grotto. The most difficult part was to cut through the earth that had been brought in without its crumbling by means of beams and boards. It was kept in place and the hole was made. This trench, as I have said, started at the middle basin that was uncovered in this part and continued to the third basin by going through the grotto. Stairs located close to the large basin allowed one to enter the trench and pass his way into the vegetable garden. A wooden spout at the bottom of the center basin allowed the water to flow into the large wooden gutter that went through the grotto and into barrels placed to make watering easier. I give all these details because they amused the emperor very much and show that we were all disposed to do whatever would make his majesty forget his suffering and his captivity.